Hi, this is Mary Kay's Positivity Podcast. I'm a yoga and meditation teacher and life coach. I'm also author of several self-help books. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. I have Cron, who's a best-selling author, psychotherapist, Enneagram teacher, Episcopal priest, and the host of the popular podcast Typology. He's also draws from his own recovery journey from drug and alcohol addiction. And the reality is everyone can heal from these self-destructive behaviors. So thanks, Ian, for joining us today.
Super glad to be here. Thank you.
So, Ian, you've been open about your own 30-year journey with recovery and alcoholism. You write in The Fix that the 12 steps saved and restored your life. Can you share more on your story and the 12 steps and how it transformed your life for our audience?
Yeah, I'm super glad to do so. So I began my recovery journey in 1987 from drinking. Spent quite a number of years in recovery, suffered a relapse. That's part of my story. I kind of reached a place in my journey as a writer where I'm like, my life has been so incredibly impacted by the 12 steps that I need to share them with a wider audience than just people in the rooms of recovery, right? Like the 12 steps don't just apply to people in active recovery from addictions like alcoholism or drug addiction. Like, they can help anybody, and I wanted everybody to be able to learn about them and apply them to their own lives.
Mm-hmm. Well, can you explain the meaning of the title, The Fix? What did that have to do with the 12?
Yeah, well, one day I was on the phone with my literary agent, and I was describing the book, and I said, well, everybody in the world is looking for a fix, right? Oh. Like, just for the fundamental distress that they feel from being human, right? And so we all are turning to something to try and comfort ourselves. And that could be food, it could be drugs, it could be porn, it could be sex, it could be a relationship, it could be workaholism, it could be gaming, it could be people pleasing. I mean, the list is endless, right? And all of these things, these behaviors are self-sabotaging and self-destructive. And so I'm like, everybody's looking for a fix. I'm like, there's the name of the book, The Fix.
Totally.
And it's a double entendre, right? Because what I'm also suggesting in the title is that the fix you're looking for is found in the 12 steps.
Right. And anyone can benefit. You don't have to be an alcoholic. It's just any type of addiction.
Any type of addiction. And by the way, one of the premises of the book is, fundamentally, everybody is an addict on some level, right? Some people have more immediate public and lethal addictions, right? Other people have secret addictions. Other people just have repeating patterns of behavior that just continue to screw up their lives, but they can't seem to stop on their own. That's where the 12 steps come in and provide a solution.
Right. So what would you say to someone listening or reading your book that thinks this doesn't apply to them because they don't consider themselves an addict in the classic sense of the word?
Yeah, well, you're just not an addict in the classic sense of the word, but that doesn't mean you're not an addict. just not in the stereotype that you have formulated in your mind. It's super interesting. The man who founded Alcoholics Anonymous and wrote the 12 Steps was named Bill Wilson. And one of the things that he said in the early pages of the book, the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, which is like the Bible for people in that world, right? Mm-hmm. In the early stages, he says, the 12 steps would actually benefit everyone, but I have just chosen in these early days to focus my energies on bringing this message to alcoholics. So even Bill Wilson said, these steps were the key to living a joyous, happy, and free life. Mm-hmm. And anyone following them would derive all the same benefits that somebody who is an alcoholic or a drug addict or an overeater or whatever your thing is, mm-hmm. anybody could derive benefit from it. And I just think everybody needs a program of recovery.
Mm-hmm. What were the worst consequences when you hit rock bottom?
Well, For me, family problems that had to be repaired, economic fallout from not being able to work as well, you know what I mean? And just how about just inner distress? You know what I mean? Like just carrying the daily angst and burden of a secret compartmentalized life.
Right.
And just we talk about bewilderment, confusion, and just not being the highest expression of myself, the person I knew myself to be, that I was actually no longer at the helm of my own life. Something else was, and that's a lot of distress to live in.
Right. Did you have any adverse childhood experiences that explained anything?
I mean, my dad was an alcoholic. He died from alcoholism and drug addiction. So you can imagine that my family upbringing was pretty chaotic and certainly had its share of traumas,
Right.
But, over the years, I've worked through a lot of that stuff. But addiction is very complicated, right? Like, it's not a matter of like, oh, it's just about trauma, which is what Gabor Mate might say, mm-hmm. or it's just about genes, and, biology, that certain people are genetically set up for addiction, right? It's so complicated. It involves socioeconomics, it involves family, it involves genes, it involves so many different factors. Mm-hmm. So just to point to one thing would be too simplistic.
Right. So can you define addiction? Like, how do you know if you have a problem?
So I think my best definition of addiction, and I could give a bunch, but the one that I would think would be best for you all would be that an addiction is an unhealthy, compulsive relationship with a person, a behavior, or a substance that has mood-altering effects and negative consequences. Right? So, for example, if you're an overeater or you're somebody who's like compulsively exercising, right? These things have mood-altering effects, right? You sneak down at 2 o'clock in the morning because you're anxious and depressed, and you suddenly find yourself eating a tub of, ice cream. And that has mood-altering effects, right? It brings comfort. It's a solution to a problem, mm-hmm. right? And by the way, you're eating all the time, right? Like you just can't stop. Like your sugar consumption. If you're an overeater,
right?
That has mood-altering effects, and boy, it sure has negative consequences, right?
Right.
Same thing could be said of workaholism. Like I know tons of people who have paid enormous. That get a mood-altering effect from all of the work they're doing. It distracts them from the pain they're really feeling inside. It's an external solution for an internal problem. Okay, that's a sure sign that you're in trouble, right? If you're trying to use external solutions to solve internal problems, that's like going to the hardware store to buy bread, right? You are shopping in the wrong place.
Right.
All of these things, again, have mood-altering effects, negative consequences, and if you can't stop them, then there's a problem that's present.
Yeah. Well, you're known as the Enneagram guy. Do you think there is any correlation between a person's Enneagram number and their propensity for addiction? Or could you explain what Enneagram is to the audience? I'm not sure everybody knows.
Yeah, so years ago I wrote a book called The Road Back to You. Much to my surprise, it sold well over 1 million copies, and it just keeps selling.
Oh, wow.
Which actually is indicative not so much of the quality of the book as it is about how interested people are in understanding their inner worlds, right?
Right.
The Enneagram is an ancient personality typing system. It teaches there are 9 basic personality styles in the world, one of which we gravitate toward and adopt in childhood as a way to cope, feel safe, to protect ourselves, and to navigate the new world of relationships in which we find ourselves, right? Mm-hmm. It's weirdly accurate and incredibly helpful and insightful for people. I wish I had come up with it. I just gave it a voice and a language that mm-hmm. people enjoyed. So people can check it out. And my podcast, Typology, is about the Enneagram as well. So in terms of Enneagram types and addiction, you know what? I honestly meet people in the rooms of recovery of every single Enneagram type. like addictions are no respecter of personality, right? Like they can afflict anybody, right? Now,
Right.
certain types have more impulse control problems, but there are actually pitfalls in each type that could make them vulnerable to addictive behavior, right?
Right.
So if all the other factors are present, it's not like, like when you hear people say, "Oh, he has an addictive personality," that's a ridiculous statement, right? Like that's so simplistic, it's dumb. You know what I mean? Like it's like that's not actually true. Like there are too many other factors involved in addiction, and actually, to tell you the truth, human beings in general, regardless of their personality style, are wired for addiction. That's just neuroscience.
Right.
Like we are averse to pain, and we're drawn to pleasure. That's a fact about human beings, right?
Right.
We push away pain, we leap at pleasure. We have reward centers in the brain. The brain says, "Ooh, I like that," and then all of a sudden, the brain goes, "I want more of that." Right? That's called what happens when dopamine takes off, right? And we just suddenly find ourselves in a loop of behavior that lights up our reward center, and it goes like, "Keep giving me more." Right? Then we develop resistance. So if you're a workaholic, it's the thing like, "Oh, I really love the feeling I get when I close a deal." Right? I just sell a house and I just made a bonus. I really love that feeling because it makes me finally feel good about myself, and it takes away the feelings of shame and like I'm not enough, and it gives me an opportunity to prove something to my family of origin about my value and to myself, and I feel so good. And it's like, well, now I got to get 2 of those.
Yeah. The
next time, right? Now I got to. So it's just like a drug. It's just doing the same stuff, and then it has a mood-altering effect. Begins to have negative consequences on your health, on your family, on your relationships. Maybe even on your ethics sometimes, right? And suddenly, now you're in a loop.
Yeah. So how does the 12-step program help? Like, is there one step that's really hard to get over the hump? I'm not familiar with it at all. So if you could take us through.
Sure. So the 12 steps are simple, but they're not easy, right? But what they do is get at the underlying causes and conditions that are driving addictions unconsciously, right? Like what's going on in the background that's causing you to keep engaging in behaviors that I'd love to stop, but I just can't seem to get off the gerbil wheel, right?
Right.
And so the first 3 steps, right? Admitted we were powerless over blank, so insert your particular addiction or problem, right? That our lives have become unmanageable. And if unmanageable, like, I still have a car and listen, when I was at the peak of my addiction, and during a relapse, I've only had one of those, but like I was killing it. I had expensive cars. I had a beautiful home. I had a beautiful dog, great wife. You know what I mean? Like, things are great. So manageability doesn't mean, I'm living under a bridge.
Right.
It could just mean it's emotionally unmanageable. Like I am quietly desperate and depressed or anxious, or my inner world feels out of control, or my relationships are suffering because of this, on and on. Or sometimes I tell a young person in addiction, I'm like, okay, if you can't cop to unmanageability, how about your life is just intolerable? Yeah. Like, let's just start there, Right. And then the second step is came to believe in a power greater than myself could restore me to sanity. And then the third one is turned my will and my life over to the care of God as I understood him. And now, so this is the spiritual part of the program. Now, some people are turned off by this because they're atheists or agnostics, right? They shouldn't be. I know tons of atheists and agnostics in 12-step programs, right, that follow this. You get to decide who the power is. It just can't be you. Right. Because you are how you got here, right? Like you running your own life apparently is not going so great. Right. So you actually need someone else. Now, I know some people who formulate a relationship with art or the outdoors, or they are into Native American spirituality, or they're into Christianity, or they're into, they go back to synagogue, or whatever it is. You just have to establish peace with a higher power that can do for you what you cannot do for yourself.
Right.
That's key. First step.
Right.
Right.
Makes
then
sense.
Then 4 through 7 is about, now you've mended relationship with your own spirit. Now it's time to mend your relationship with yourself. And that involves taking a hard look at what's going on inside. So there are some inventories. There's ways of looking at past relationships that you still carry a lot of resentment and pain about that have to be addressed. And also a willingness to look at your own, what in 12-step programs call character defects. I like to call them character defenses, right? Like just in a way that's dispassionate and not shaming at all.
Right.
To look at your stuff, right? Like, one of the things I learned when I in treatment, and then all my other years of, working with other people, is like, I now have a pretty good list of the things that regularly trip me up and make me an ineffective person in the world as a result of working steps. I'm a person who generally often struggles with envy, right? Sometimes I worry too much about financial security. I just give you a long list of character defenses or defects that I regularly monitor and regulate because I've done the work of looking at them. And I also know that the only way those are going to get addressed is if I surrender them to my higher power and allow him, her, it, whatever you want to put there, to take care of them with me. You know what I mean? Like, to live a surrendered, serene life. And then finally, 8 and 9 are about fixing your relationship with other people. And then finally, 10 through 12 are really steps that are concerned with how do I cultivate a life that supports ongoing growth and health in each of those domains of my life. My relationship with my higher power, with myself, and with other people. If you can get that stuff worked out, you'd be surprised at how good your life can get.
Oh, it'll turn around for sure.
Oh, yeah.
And then having a support system, I think, is so critical. And people that are in the same boat, it makes sense that you lean on them. A lot of people try to do it alone because there's a lot of shame. And that just seems counterintuitive.
So let's just talk about that for 1 second. So in the book, The Fix, I talk about like having a supportive community is super helpful. Now you can do this book alone, and actually there's a workbook that goes with it to help you walk through the steps. And even then I say, look, if you can, find 3 or 4 people to do this, like in a book group for 6 or 8 weeks or 12 weeks or whatever you want to do. Form your own little 12-step community to do the work, right? But listen, there are hundreds of 12-step recovery groups. There are recovery groups for workaholics, Overeaters Anonymous, Al-Anon for people who are in essentially relationships with people and they're addicted to those relationships, right? And boy, you've seen that, right? Like where people are in dysfunctional relationships that they're weirdly loyal to no matter what. And codependency.
Also, social media. Try taking a phone. Try taking a phone away from a teen and watch that reaction.
Well, I can tell you that I can do the same to a 40-year-old and they'll have the same reaction.
Right.
I mean, I don't. Most people I see during school hours are on their phones too. Out in public. You can easily find a community. And the reason community is important is for the reasons you just mentioned. Number one, when you have a community, what begins to happen is that you get sick alone, but you get well together. That's one of my mantras. We get sick alone and we heal together. Right? So part of the reason that one of the things that fuels addiction, maybe more than almost anything else, is shame. And shame lives in the dark. And what's so amazing in the 12 steps, right, is when you do step 5, for example, which is admitted to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our wrongs. And that means I got to go and sit and talk to somebody in a really prepared way to talk about how my self-sabotaging behaviors or addictions have cost me and other people. Like I got to come out of the shadows.
Mm-hmm.
And what happens when you do that is you realize that, oh, guess what? The person listening is smiling and nodding their head because they've done the same thing.
Yeah.
And there's this relief that you're not alone.
Yeah.
That, oh, this is a human problem. This isn't a me problem. And then the shame begins to recede, which then renders the need for the behavior to continue on.
Mm-hmm. Right. And I think this is why it must be hard when people do an intervention with someone, because there's this feeling that you're alone, like you're the one with the problem. And, everyone's got, like you say, everyone's got some sort of addiction. So it's a lot of times you're just trying to help the person that's really ready to go off the deep end most, but we're all affected. So we're all in this together.
Yes. The other thing that makes interventions hard is usually if the person isn't ready yet. And I've been part of many interventions,
Mm-hmm.
Is that the power of denial is so great.
Yeah.
If you haven't, it's very hard to explain to people how an addiction can take such a deep root in another human being that they actually can't see the source of their problem.
Right.
But that's the nature of addiction. It's the only disease that will tell you don't have a disease.
Yeah. Right.
But like diabetes does not get up in the morning and convince you don't have diabetes. You know what I mean?
Right.
But the nature of an addiction is that the addiction wants to protect itself against you doing anything about it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. Were you ever a smoker?
No.
All right. Well, let's take smoking for example, right? Like you're suffering in your health. You can't walk up staircases without, needing to stop halfway up. And the first thing you'll say to yourself at some point maybe is, I need to quit. And then the next thing in your mind is, next Tuesday.
Yeah.
Not now.
Right.
I'm going to do it next Tuesday,
right.
Which is just the addiction's way of saying, no, you can't live without me.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to convince you we're going to do it on Flag Day or Memorial Day or whatever,
mm-hmm.
but we'll never actually get to do it. You know what I mean? And
right.
anyone who's had an addiction knows exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah. Right. No, I mean, everybody waits for dry January. It's like, why not start during the big drinking months?
Yeah. And by the way, whenever someone says to me, I like to drink, but I count my drinks, or I only drink on Thursday to Sunday, or
mm-hmm.
I give it up every year for 3 months just to prove to myself I'm all right. I go, listen, pal, just in my experience, people who don't have an addiction don't think about it that way. Like they're not sitting there thinking to themselves, I need to prove to myself I don't have an addiction.
Yeah.
That's wonky thinking.
Right.
And should be a really good red flag that there's a problem here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because a lot of people, like you said, if they're just drinking on the weekend, think, I don't have a problem because I don't drink every day. But it's really, what if you are drinking on the weekend and you just can't stop when you're drinking? That's still a problem.
Yeah. That's still a problem.
Right.
And you have to, and actually, this is something that's sort of a revelation for people sometimes. Actually, drinking isn't the problem. Mm-hmm. It's your solution to the problem. Yeah. Right? You have one set of, and so what has to happen is you have to look at the underlying problems
mm-hmm.
and conditions that have created a necessity for you to have a fix, like drinking or eating or whatever the thing mm-hmm. is, right?
Right.
Like you have to look at what's underneath it, driving it, and root it out there. And so, you'll often hear people in recovery saying, drinking actually, it turns out drinking wasn't my problem. That was the solution to my problem, until the solution became a bigger problem than the problem it was trying to solve.
Mm-hmm.
Right? That's called hitting bottom, right? When you finally reach a point where I now have a bigger problem than the problem I was trying to solve.
Yeah, right.
Right? And then all of a sudden, hopefully lights go on and you get some help.
Mm-hmm. Well, how does someone even get started with the 12-step program? Like, you can encourage someone to go, but like, do you trick them, get them in the car and just drive them there? What's the best way?
Well, it depends on what it is they're struggling with and the program, right? One thing people can do is, I mean, at the risk of hawking my book, but here's the deal. You could just get my book and start reading it and say, is this for me or not?
Right.
Or you may know somebody that needs it and read the book and share it with them.
Right.
And then, sometimes we can just gently say to somebody, I have a feeling that this is something that might be of interest to you. And if you'd ever like to go to a meeting, I'm happy to go with you. Or, but always with a spirit of non-judgment, no shame, just concern, not confrontation. Should be done with an amazing amount of kindness. Right? The person is already suffering. Right? And so we just come alongside them and say, you know what? You work 80 hours a week, and no matter how many times I talk to you about this, you won't give up. And you keep bringing work on vacation because, you just can't seem to stop. Right? And the kids don't know you very well because you're gone 2 weeks out of the month traveling. And yeah, we're making a lot of money and this and that, but our marriage feels hollow. And you have a problem. Like, this is an addiction. This isn't a hardworking guy. This is a behavior that has mood-altering effect, negative consequences. You need help. And there are programs for that, but they could get started with my book and see how it goes.
Right. Yeah. Well, what surprised you about the 12-step program? The first time you went through it,
Yeah, so I would say, well, number one is all those depictions of 12-step meetings you see on television are they are horrible. They're nothing close to what actually happens in a 12-step meeting. Nothing. First of all, they're glum and sad, and everyone's just sitting around talking about how they can't go another day without a drink or a drink. It's like, that is not how it goes. Number one, what surprises people repeatedly is how much laughter is in the room.
Oh, that's good.
Like, they are hilarious. Like, first of all, I don't know what it is about alcoholics or drug addicts and other people in recovery. They're funny. Like, I did this thing once I have to tell you about, right? And the room just bursts into laughter. It's like the most grace-filled place you've ever been.
Right.
No judgment. Everybody's in the same boat. Nobody's judging each other. People laugh at the crazy things we've done, right? And so laughter is a huge one, and hope. And there are tear-filled moments because people care about each other in those rooms when they struggle. And the other thing is that we focus on solutions, not problems, which I think is so important.
So important because then problems will just grow. If you focus on the problem, it will grow.
Yeah, focus on the solution. Right. So it's a very solution-oriented place. And people don't generally talk a lot about, I did this when I was drinking or when I was overeating, I ate, whatever. Like, we call those drunkalogs, like, nobody really wants to hear your drunkalog. Nobody actually has one that's more interesting than anybody else's.
Right.
And plus, nobody's sitting around bragging about all their DUIs. So, I think ultimately, like, what happens in those rooms is we start talking about spirituality. We talk about developing into the kinds of human beings that are of service to the world. And making that the focus of our recovery. That's what recovery is about, right? It's about becoming a new person, and a person who is a person of integrity, character, kindness, service to others, and reorienting our whole lives around being the highest expression of who we are in the world, and bringing that to the world.
Right. Do you ever have a mother come in to talk about her child that was killed by a drunk driver?
No, I've never heard that.
I was just curious because that's such a heavy issue today,
Yeah, there's other groups for that. Yeah. In fact, there's a 12-step group called Al-Anon.
Oh, okay.
And Al-Anon is for people whose lives have been affected by others in addiction. So it'd be like mothers of addicts or alcoholics, or wives, husbands, children, right?
Right.
Or friends, spouses. And they come together to figure out how not to be codependent, which is a kind of addiction itself, right?
Right.
And that would more likely be heard in those rooms.
Well, how has the 12-step, obviously the 12-step programs transformed your life, but what does it look like to practically work the 12 steps daily? Like, do you continue to do this every day?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Now, here's the thing. Like, you go through the steps once or twice, and you do them in order, and you work them usually with a sponsor, which is somebody that's a mentor, right? Mm-hmm. But it could also just be with a little group you formed as a result of working with my book, per se. Mm-hmm. And then, my life is kind of organized about thinking about the 12 steps, right? So here's an example. You have a meeting that's you're all anxious about for business, and you're in recovery, and you might think to yourself, okay, I admit that I am powerless over the outcome of this meeting. Right. I'm applying step 1. Mm-hmm. And that it's kind of making my life unmanageable right now because I'm all wrapped around the axle about this meeting. And so I'm just going to turn it over to my higher power and go into it with an open heart and trusting that the outcome will be what it is, and whatever it is, I will have the necessary tools to deal with it. And that's just me working steps 1, 2, and 3 right then and there. I just worked steps 1, 2, and 3. I did that actually this morning for a meeting I had at 8:30. Or you go through the day and you have an argument with a woman at behind the counter at CVS, right? Mm-hmm. And it's a very unfortunate, snippy interaction. Oh, step 10, continue to take personal inventory, and when we were wrong, promptly admitted it. Mm-hmm. So I've had to do this. I have a bad interaction. I realized, sure, they had some part in it, but I have to own my part to be at peace with that person and not develop a resentment, mm-hmm. right? And so I just go back to the counter and I say, "Ma'am, I was in here a few minutes ago and I really wasn't my best self, and I just came back to apologize." And you, by the way, will often have the most beautiful interaction with that person because they've been mistreated a bunch of times.
Yeah, right.
In life, and treated as an object, not a human. Mm-hmm. And you can have, and isn't that the way we're supposed to go through the world? Is like just trying to be agents of peace and kindness and goodness, and then also to not leave damage in our wake, mm-hmm. And to just be, my kids call it adulting, right? It's just the adult right thing to do. Mm-hmm. And it also brings you peace and joy, which is what you need. And
forgiveness just releases all the anxiety,
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, in the book, I tell a story about one time I did have not an argument, but a bad interaction with a barista at a coffee shop. And because, by the way, the book is sort of funny. It definitely has my Irish sense of humor.
I'm Irish too. Yeah. I grew up with a lot of funny guys.
Yes, me too. And so it definitely has that voice in it. It's alternately funny and poignant, I think, or so I'm told.
Yeah.
And anyway, I had this argument with a woman, and I walk out. I call my sponsor. He goes, "I think it's time for a 10th step, right? Go back and make amends to this person." And I'm so resentful that I have to do this. And tail between my legs, I go back, and she puddles up and then comes out from behind the counter and gives me this big hug and says, "I kept thinking about you after you left, and I felt so sorry for what I said. And I just had an argument this morning with my boyfriend, and I just wasn't in a good space either. And next thing I know, I have a free cortado, and I know her first name now. And every time I go in that coffee shop, we greet each other like old friends."
Yeah.
And then also that spares me developing a resentment inside, that often, you get too many resentments and suddenly your addictions start to look really attractive. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like resentment about long-held things or short-term things have a corrosive effect. I think it's not Ann Patchett, but someone like that said, Elizabeth Gilbert, she said that resentment is like smoking. Just one puff is bad for you.
Yeah.
And so, clean up your side of the street every day.
Mm-hmm. Well, not to mention alcohol and drugs are poison for the brain and body and take so long to get out of your system. What other health issues does it bring?
I mean, there's a ton of them. The ones related to drug and alcohol use, they are specific to whatever the substance is.
Mm-hmm.
But let's just face it, every addiction has health consequences.
Mm-hmm.
I have a woman in my neighborhood I see, and she's clearly addicted to exercise.
Yeah.
Chances are she may have an eating disorder. I don't know, but has the appearance of someone who might.
Mm-hmm.
So even something, and I guarantee you, her addiction is telling her, guess what? Like, you need to exercise more, and exercise is actually really good for you, even though she's wasting away, right?
Right.
There's a problem there. So it doesn't, and I know guys who've had heart attacks at 48 because they were constantly on the road, eating bad food, and working themselves into the ground, or here's a goofy one. I know people who've had carpal tunnel surgery because of scrolling on their phones.
Oh, wow.
Okay. Or it's damaging their relationship with their small children because they can't stop looking at Instagram.
Yeah, that's what I worry about. Like how this is going to affect this younger generation with everyone being on their phone,
Oh, big time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So The Fix, your book, has a companion workbook, which you just mentioned. Why is it important to use this workbook? How does writing help in the recovery process?
Man, so the research about writing and journaling is super compelling, right? Mm-hmm. And there's research out of the University of Texas, Austin, out of the University of Massachusetts, out of Stanford. It's like we just know that when you commit words to the page, that there's some process, some integrative process that happens that begins to work the truths. Like you begin to process and work problems out as you're writing, right? And listen, this has been wisdom for the ages, right? This isn't, even though the research is new, it's not new to, in the history of literature. So when you have a workbook, you actually, if you don't want to go to a 12-step meeting, you want to just kind of beta test this for yourself, the workbook affords you that opportunity, right? Like just sit down and begin to write the answers to these things and begin to work out what's going on with your addictions. And again, if you can do it with 2 or 3 other people, I think it only accelerates and deepens the experience. So just finding a couple of friends, a small group that you get together with. If you're a businessman, you do it with a couple of friends over lunch once a week, or you do it with, small groups with like a reading group with your spouse, whatever. It can be really powerful.
Yeah, no, it's a great idea. I love it. I'm going to definitely give it to people for Christmas for sure.
Ooh, yummy, yummy.
So what is one practical step that someone can do today to begin their journey toward recovery?
Well, I think the first step is taking a really honest look at your life and beginning to discern, are there self-defeating behaviors that are at operation in my life that I would like to unwind and not have dominate me any longer? And listen, everybody has at least one. Usually, how about people who are addicted to control? Like trying to control other people. They do it with charm, or they do it by bullying, or both. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, it's just terror. They're just afraid. and fear is coming out as control, right?
Right.
And or they're, which is kind of an addiction to self, by the way. You just begin to look, and some people will right away be able to self-identify. They may say, "Yeah, I basically can't stop smoking pot," and telling myself, "At least I'm not an alcoholic," right? That's, and that, by the way, is denial, right? It's like that's your addiction telling you, "Well, at least you're not an alcoholic," right?
Right.
Or it may be that you are in an addicted relationship with one of your children. And you're addicted to them because they have problems and you're trying to control and manage them. And that has now taken over all of your thinking life and emotional life. Like you're just completely focused on fixing your kid, which you can't do, by the way. That's not how it works. It's just the admission of powerlessness. And here's the beautiful thing. When you finally admit you're powerless, you discover that powerlessness is a weird, paradoxical is a superpower. Like it is. When you finally say, "I'm out of ammo. I've tried everything." Some people, for example, are addicted to their emotions, right? They just can't, they're just...
Yeah, they're full of drama and they're addicted to the drama.
Yeah, I'm addicted to drama. Right. It's like, and it's making a mess out of their lives, and it's always made a mess out of their lives. They've tried to stop, and they don't know how. But when you finally go, "I'm out of ammo here," I've tried everything on my own unaided willpower to fix this problem, and I have failed, and I'm never going to succeed. I now finally admit I am not going to succeed at this by myself. That provides the openness and the willingness to do something like the 12 steps to help you realize healing.
Right. Did you find that as a byproduct, you had this profound spiritual awareness that didn't exist before, maybe?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's really important because the whole purpose of the 12 steps is not to give up drinking or drugs or sex or porn or whatever your particular thing is. It's actually stated that the purpose of the 12 steps is to facilitate a spiritual awakening of sufficient force that it renders your need for an unhealthy relationship with a person, behavior, or substance unnecessary. It's like you just don't need it anymore.
Right.
You have finally reorganized your inner world in such a way that it's no longer necessary. You've now dealt with the underlying causes of the addiction or of the troublesome, repetitive, redundant behavior, right? It's like all of a sudden you're like, "Oh, I didn't even have to try because now I've had a spiritual awakening that has made this unnecessary."
That's beautiful.
And I'm telling you, I've had that experience. And what's amazing about the 12 steps is, and what I love is, I can point to possibly hundreds of millions of cases of people who were deemed hopeless, who had complete, utter, miraculous turnarounds as a result of working those steps.
Wow, I love that. That's awesome. Well, it makes sense. Like as you're talking, first of all, I think this is the most important book everyone should read. And I really didn't understand much about 12-step program because I didn't grow up with alcoholism and I don't drink much. Most people when I'm out and dancing and having the time of my life are like, "And she's sober." So
right.
I really would love to understand it because you're right. I mean, we all have addictions of some other form, which is completely related. And it just seems really important. It seems like the result would be some type of spiritual awakening as you're talking. That's what made me think of it.
Yeah, and it doesn't have to be a spiritual awakening where suddenly, you become like your crazy Aunt Carol who's had some religious experience and can't stop talking about it. Like, in other words,
no,
you get
peace.
to determine it.
Right.
Yeah, and you get to determine who that higher power is.
I think it's a sense of peace. I mean,
it is peace.
Yeah.
Yeah, and serenity. It's like the you suddenly realize that everything's gonna, like, I remember one time I had a health crisis, and very unexpected, and I was very nervous about it, and I called my sponsor on the way to a doctor's appointment, and I said to him, well, everything's gonna be all right. And it wasn't a very convincing thing. I was just saying it, everything's going to be all right. And he just paused for a moment, and then he said, Ian, everything already is all right.
Yeah. Right.
And I went, that's like 12-step ninja stuff right there. You know what I mean? It's like, I was like, what did you just say? It's like, oh, everything already is all right.
And
no matter what.
For all of us, yes.
For all of us. But most people don't live with the kind of awakening to realize that that's the case. And just as, I guess it was Thoreau that said, most people live lives of quiet desperation.
Mm-hmm.
They look okay on the outside, but inside they're quietly desperate. And the 12 steps could really help with that.
One time I was complimenting a nephew, and I said, you really seem at peace and calm now, because he used to have some anger issues, and he said, no, Mary Kay, I'm really like a duck. I'm frantically paddling underneath.
Yes. And by the way, there's another example of an addiction. Like there are people who have very serious problems with anger. And anger itself can become a kind of addiction, right? It has mood altering effect and negative consequences. When you power up, I mean, the chemicals that go off in your brain, I'm just speaking as a therapist now, and in your body somatically are incredibly powerful. And, it gives you a lot of emotional, quote unquote, benefit. But there's an addiction that almost always has more negative consequences than you really want to have to pay.
And especially it happens to people that are really kind and good natured. They just like explosive over something small and minuscule, and it's just a response to maybe something from the past, but it manifests to just mundane things. So I agree. Well, you have really opened my eyes, and it's been fascinating talking with you. How can people get your book or get in touch with you or learn more about your other books?
Yeah, well, all right. So they can go to they go on Amazon, they go into a bookstore, a local bookstore, and pick up a copy of The Fix, or it drops on January 28th. Officially. Now, they can also pre-order it now on Amazon, which is of some benefit to them because they're guaranteed to get the lowest price for it. So they can just hop on Amazon, plug in Ian Cron, IANCRON. They can go to my website, which is also ianmorgancron.com. And on socials, I'm at Ian Morgan Cron.
Oh, great. Well, I really appreciate you talking to our listeners, and I wish you the best of luck, and thank you so much.
Yeah, it's been a delight.
Please find a comfortable position in your home or outside. And I want you just to release all the expectations of outcome and pressure from your life. And take a deep breath in and a long exhale. And just close your eyes. And place your hand over your heart. And as you breathe in, I want you to imagine drawing light into your heart center And now breathe out and visualize this light expanding outside your body. Imagine like your aura, your energy field is expanding with love. And just feel the warmth and love radiating from your heart further and further out, up to the universe. Imagine it traveling all around, expanding. And this light is your divine essence. And just imagine the light is like the sunshine touching your face, warming your body, knowing that it's a constant source of love and wisdom. Know that the light brings you powerful confidence. The light fills you with love and shines out to every living being. Allow the light to give you a deep sense of peace and compassion. And just remember, everything always works out for you. Remember that you are human and allowed to make mistakes. I love my life. I am worthy of love. I love who I am and who I'm becoming. I find joy and gratitude in every moment of my life. I manifest my dreams quickly and easily. I love living in a higher alignment, connected to this life source, the universe, a higher power. And when I connect to that higher power, I feel infinite peace. No matter what things look like, my life is always working out for me for the highest good. My life is extraordinary. My life is beautiful. Allow the muscles in your face to relax. Unclench your teeth. Relax your jaw. Soften your eyes. Filling your entire body with the light source. Filling your heart with love. And visualizing that heart radiating, emanating far beyond you, touching everyone you come in contact with, so that they feel your genuine, authentic love. You are amazing. Thanks for joining us today. Namaste.